Welcome to Humanitarian Alternatives special interview on the COVID-19 pandemic. Today we're joining Khaled Mansour in Aman. So good morning, Khaled.
Good morning, Audrey. How are you?
Khaled, you are a senior fellow at the Arab Reform Initiative. After 10 years of journalism, you've worked 13 years in several aid and peacekeeping operations. You led Egypt's premier rights organization before stepping down to focus on writing and teaching. Tell us, the virus is traveling fast today, so what actions have been implemented in countries like Egypt or Jordan, where you live now, in the light of a much more fragile public health response capacity?
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit about the region here, because internationally we have much more information and better information about what's happening in Europe, North America, and to a lesser extent in China. We are talking about a very varied region and two different countries, Egypt and Jordan. In MENA in general, the Middle East and North Africa, we're talking as of early May about 200,000 cases, but half of them are in Iran, while Saudi Arabia and Qatar have together 50,000. So the other countries, including Egypt and Jordan, have less numbers, which is very weird, because if Egypt is 100 million people, which means about 25% of the population of this region minus Iran, it doesn't make sense that as of early May, Egypt has less than 8,000 cases. And this is because of two things. Largely the under-testing, because they haven't used enough tests, they didn't have them, and their policy was not to implement them. And secondly, because of a delay in March in being transparent about it, because of fear about the end of the tourism season in Egypt. It's radically different in Jordan, which is a smaller country and more dependent on remittances from Jordanians working in the Gulf rather than from tourism. But again, I mean, as you said, we are talking about a region, and including these two countries, in which health spending is really low to start with, which means the infrastructure is not ready. I mean, some countries like Yemen spends less than maybe 0.6% on health. The best one, which is Israel, for many reasons, spends less than 5% on health. While these countries in the region are maybe among the highest 4 or 5 in the highest 10 of countries buying arms around the world. Secondly, this pandemic came to the region after a decade of really turmoil and turbulence in this region. Like maybe people in France or in Greece have had like economic difficulties, but this region had economic, social, political difficulties. 3 or 4 countries in this region are in civil war. 2 countries have renewed very strict and dictatorial authoritarian systems. So it was really in a tough situation before the pandemic. A country like Lebanon was already in economic meltdown. So when you look at all of that, you look at a country like Egypt, for example, with 100 million people, it has 5,000 ventilators. So basically, only 5,000 people, and that's after you kick out everybody else who's already on these ventilators. 5,000 people who have corona to an extent or have COVID-19 to an extent that needs hospitalization can be hospitalized. And even the number of ICU beds which are available in the country are less than 10,000 beds. And again, these are very, very, very low numbers, and they repeat themselves in all other countries because of the low health spending, with the exception, of course, of the Gulf countries. Egypt was late in imposing curfews, and even when they imposed it, they imposed curfews and restrictions. It was not well observed. And now, in early May, they are backtracking because they think it's hurting the economy, and they have to go back. Jordan, on the other hand, was very strict from day one. It's the only country in the region that had a 24/7 almost curfew for 5 days when they started to impose curfew. And since then, after they relaxed it a little bit, they have had a curfew for 16 hours a day, curfews, and very, very small numbers of cars were allowed to drive. And maybe this is why the reported cases is under 500 cases in Jordan. Of course, also Jordan has a much more efficient health system and a much better political system in a way that allows feedback from people compared to Egypt. Yes, the two countries are different, but they have things in common as well that will make them vulnerable to COVID-19. They are both highly dependent on remittances, money that's sent by laborers in oil-rich countries in the Gulf. And these oil-rich countries are bleeding money, and they are in a tough situation now. Both countries have a large segment of their labor in the informal economy. People who work day to day, daily wages. Those guys are largely not insured. They don't have health care, and they're not working either because of isolation or lockdown, or because the markets have slowed down. Both countries, the people in general have mistrust in government. People have discontent about the economies, corruption, and what have you. And both countries also in common have a dose of, if you like, a culturalist approach, a dose of fatalism, maybe because of religion, and that helps them maybe have some resilience, but also leads to taking some risk. As I said before, numbers are still relatively low in both countries, but unless some of the theories that are not proven so far would work out, like the heat kills the virus, or countries that has a high proportion of tuberculosis and polio vaccination will fare better. Or if these don't materialize to be real, I am really worried about the other shoe dropping in Egypt, and then you have an exponential increase that we will not be ready at all for, because the public health system is really low. Finally, in terms of how both countries are trying to help the most vulnerable sectors of the population, again, it's very skewed. Like, for example, in Egypt, they dedicated about $6.5 billion as an economic recovery package. Half of that was basically given to the tourism and construction companies in terms of easy loans and write-off on loans and stuff like that. And then another big chunk of it was given to help the banks and the financial sectors. So you ended up with a very small amount that they said they will give to the registered informal workers, which is a minority of informal workers, and they will give each of them $35. So it's a very skewed package that happened in Egypt. Of course, I will not talk about the Gulf region. It's a totally different ball game. I mean, in the Gulf, I think the total package for the 6 Arab Gulf countries is about $120 billion. And that's mainly to help the economy. It's an interior economy. It's a different ball game. But we will speak about it a little bit more later. They will suffer as well because of the slowdown in the economy in general.
Yeah, so you started talking about the economic consequences of this pandemic. Do you see other major long-term consequences to this pandemic in the region?
I think there will be a long-term political ramifications and social ramifications. Firstly, in the short term, there will be more securitization, if you like, that security agencies will have a bigger role to play. They already using surveillance, not only in the good way, surveillance that's used was used in South Korea and China to pinpoint people who have been hit and people they mixed with, etc., etc. But they are now using surveillance even in the middle of this mayhem. They're using surveillance to arrest people and to kick out of the country foreign journalists who are reporting on the coronavirus, or arrest local journalists who report on it in a critical way as compared to what they would like. So it's I think there will be indeed like more impact rather than only the economic impact, though the economic impact will be the most important and the most difficult one in the region in general.
And if we talk about Europe a bit, how researchers from what we call the Global South are analyzing the current situation in Europe, and what are their critical views on how the situation is being handled by European countries?
I think there's a mix of like jealousy, apprehension, anger, and fear. And I will explain that. Like there's jealousy because of I mean, people look at Germany and at France and they see a democratic process of sorts in which the government and the parliament, they are discussing, people are debating, the media is covering, there is ease of communication, people have a good sense of what is being applied and why. And there is a relatively better predictability, like all these statisticians, the public discourse around it on TV is actually helping and reassuring. We don't have that in our region. We have lots of conspiracy theories making it on the social media, and it's not being held, that situation, by the fact that people like Trump and others are peddling the same conspiracy theories that doesn't help people at all. And secondly, that in fact, in reality, it's very difficult to apply some of the basic protective strategies like social distancing. It's very difficult. It's even impossible in more densely populated slums and poor areas in Egypt or in Gaza Strip in Palestine, where staying in overcrowded houses can be nightmarish and more harmful than just going out in the street. Also, there is a lot of anecdotal evidence and reporting about increasing violence against women because of staying at home, and men staying at home and getting out of work, becoming unemployed, unable to provide, etc., etc. It's not doing well. So there is this element of jealousy, if you like. There is an element of apprehension because borders have been more closed than they had been before. So now they are more sealed, and that's bad for workers, bad for goods, bad for agricultural exports, bad for tourism. So people are apprehensive about the current impact and the future impact. People also are angry. I mean, because they look that in the middle of this mayhem and what should be a global challenge, they see more support coming from European countries to security agencies or counter-migration agencies or counter-terrorism agencies and governments in the region. They're even like almost new or negotiated arms deals between European countries and countries in the region. They are giving money to security agencies to restrict asylum seekers in horrible places like Libya and in the southern Mediterranean in general, as if nothing is happening. And of course, there is a long-term fear about what will remain of that after the pandemic is resolved, including how the pandemic situation is resolved. So let's assume there's a vaccine by any of the 3 or 4 or 5 big pharmaceutical companies in the world. How long will it take to come to these areas? How long will it be before it's affordable for the poor and people who have no access to basic healthcare to start with? So their fear is that long term, that even when it becomes better in countries in Europe and North America, because it's not seen as a global threat, the vaccine will not come to us as fast as it will go everywhere else.
Yeah, you mentioned the support to international security organizations, and we have seen here in Europe that solidarity is developing within national closed doors. So in your opinion, how can we allow a real international solidarity to be expressed?
I mean, so far, Audrey, the real international solidarity is weak, and it's largely instrumentalized. For example, let me tell you about solidarity in the other direction, from the weaker to the stronger. Egypt has sent a couple of plane loads of medical supplies, masks, and stuff like that to Italy and to the US. I mean, it's a bit absurd. I mean, it's a nice gesture, but it's largely motivated by other drives, by geostrategic drive, by certain interests common to the regimes in Egypt and in Italy and in the US. The other way around, we haven't seen much. I mean, governments have closed borders. As you know, the UN, which is supposedly the United Nations, is the international organ in which solidarity can materialize. It didn't even meet once on the issue at the level of the Security Council, which is the only place within the United Nations that can actually take binding resolutions. The General Assembly did not meet to discuss the issue. Or to give guidance on what's happening. The World Health Organization role is at best advisory, so it's not being able to engender solidarity or to help translate solidarity that's very evident in a huge number of statements by civil society organizations, by aid organizations, by the goodwill of people. It does not translate into political action or into government actions. And as we can see, even it's the governments are going the other direction, as we have seen with the United States defunding the World Health Organization in the middle of pandemic. I mean, they are $300 or $400 million, which might sound like a huge sum of money, but it's maybe less than half the budget of a big hospital in the US. So in a way, what we see more in terms of global solidarity, that the other person, the person living in the other country, is not really seeing that if he or she has a healthy condition that will protect us all, and we need to work on that to help really maintain protection for humanity. The other person, he or she, is seen as a possible source of infection that we need to keep behind walls, we need to keep away from us, and that's not going to generate real solidarity. I think the only way out from this abysmal situation is to look into serious ways to strengthen the World Health Organization as a place where governments can take action. And governments, as became very clear to us, are the strongest player now in the international field. I mean, they can close borders, they can prevent civil society organizations from work if they like. They have most of the power. And clearly, there is a rising sort of populist and right of center self-protective sentiment among the populations in Europe and North America that they need to protect themselves before thinking more of global solidarity. I think without that ethos, without that feeling changing, and I have no clue how to change that, it will be very difficult to change the behavior of governments.
So yeah, what will be our role as citizens to make those governments change?
I think we are exercising part of this role right now by talking. Um, um, I think to become cynical and do nothing is the worst thing that can be done now. To become afraid and think of yourself before others is a normal human reaction. We need to show to people and convince them without trying to grandstand them or to moralize to them that each single person protection and integrity depends on everybody else protection and health. And this is not just wishful thinking. It's real. It's like what happened with polio, with the chickenpox. I mean, with all other epidemics in the world, that you cannot kill them everywhere. You cannot kill them anywhere without killing them everywhere, without facing them everywhere. So it's talking about it, talking all the time, having practical and pragmatic policy solutions, exposing the hypocrisy, and counting. I have to say it this way: counting on the goodwill of people. I think more and more people have given up on the humanist project, if you like, in the last 10 years. But maybe one of the good side effects of COVID-19 is to give us a renewed sense of importance and faith in how we can work together for each of us benefit. I mean, I look at it as informed selfishness. That I'm a humanist because I also care about myself, and I cannot care about myself without caring about humanity. It's a lot of work, Audrey. This might seem like far-fetched and long-term project, but this is the only way to proceed.
It's a good positive note to end the interview, Khaled. Do you have maybe any other points you would like to say about the pandemic and the situation?
I think we will have some horrendous short-term effects and impacts that we have to deal with, but if we can seize them as opportunities to reform systems that were dysfunctional, that were inefficient, that were only helping the small minority, then we can turn COVID-19 into a good opportunity, actually, to change and fix a few things that were not working for us.
Great. That's a great end of the interview. Khaled, thank you very much.